Okay, last time we talked about these three important Lacanian orders of real, symbolic, and imaginary. We don't yet have a really good discussion of the real in our assigned readings, so let's hold off on that. In the meantime, I would say definitely look up this notion of the real, R-E-A-L, real, in the Dylan Evans Dictionary and see how much progress you can make. We'll be coming back to talk about it more later. The symbolic is the order that receives the most attention in chapters 3 and 4. So let's hold off on that. The imaginary, very briefly, is touched upon. Let's focus on there for a moment. Page 39. I'm looking about midway down the page on 39 with the paragraph that begins, "How is this possible?" Now, the this that he's talking about, how is this possible? In order to find that out, you read a few lines above on page 39. What makes the human world a world covered with objects derives from the fact that, and here's the key point, the object of human interest is the object of the other's desire. Now, this is not that class, and I'm not going to be delving too far into Lacan's theory of desire. At this point, we can just very simply say that on one level, you can read this sentence as saying, I want what you want. There are other ways to read it too. I want because you want. But in this case, we can read it very simply as just saying, I want what you want. Now, let's get to this paragraph on 39 that begins, how is this possible? How is it possible that the object of my interest is the object of your interest? It's possible, Lacan says on 39, because the human ego is the other, and because in the beginning the subject is closer to the form of the other than to the emergence of his own tendency. Now, when Lacan says ego here, this is a key term in psychoanalysis and one that you can, of course, look up on your own. The ego is your sense of me, not me as Dr. McCormick, your professor, all this kind of stuff. No, your ego is your sense of self, how you see yourself, how you conceive of yourself. If somebody has a big ego, you might say this is somebody who talks a lot about themselves. They have lots of ideas about how they are, all of which only show you how they see themselves. But by the sheer fact that they address their egotistical speech to you, they're also asking you to see them that way. The object of my desire is yours. I want you to want me. But I always want you to want me in a very particular way. I want you to see me in a very particular way. Egotistical speech is speech that asks the other, asks you as a listener, as an auditor, as an audience, as an addressee, to see me in a particular way. So let's just hold some of this in mind as we move through this. The human ego is the other, because in the beginning the subject is closer to the form of the other than to the emergence of his own tendency. It means that our sense of self is very much dependent on how we initially see others. Now let's just keep reading and see if we can come back and make sense of this. He is originally an inchoate collection of desires. There you have the true sense of the expression fragmented body. And the initial synthesis of the ego is essentially an alter ego. It is alienated. The desiring human subject is constructed around a center which is the other, insofar as he gives the subject his unity. And the first encounter with the object is with the object as the object of the other's desire. This is a complicated little paragraph. For some of you that have taken psychoanalysis classes with me in the past, it won't be that complicated, but if this is your first time around, it sounds like a real trick. Things to look up: fragmented body, ego, alter ego. Another word for alter ego that you'll see in the literature is specular image. Worth looking up, specular image. And I would also suggest that you read up on this stage called the mirror stage that Lacan is working out in the 1940s. A lot of what he's saying here is just a follow-up on a very important early essay of his called The Mirror Stage. Okay, let's talk through this at the level that Lacan does in his theory of the mirror stage. Have you ever seen a baby in front of a mirror? They do weird stuff. You can look up mirror stage on YouTube and find videos of babies in front of mirrors doing certain things. Now here's what happens. You put a baby in front of a mirror. We're talking like 6 months or older. Probably 6 to 18 months, let's say. You put a baby in front of a mirror. Initially, that baby does not know that the reflection in the mirror is a reflection of them. Think of this cat video where the cat is put in front of the mirror, can't figure out that it is a reflection of them, thinks it's another cat, and starts playing with it, starts lunging at it, sometimes even attacking it. Babies, human, do the same thing. Now what's weird about this is that if you take a chimp and you put it in front of a mirror, a chimp immediately looks at the reflection in the mirror, realizes it's fake or an illusion, and then turns elsewhere. Not so with human children, and I would also suggest with human adults. We know that it's an illusion as adults, but we are still fascinated with our mirror images. That's worth noting here. The child at this age, 6 to 18 months, doesn't know that the baby in the mirror is them. Now here's the thing. Human babies at this stage have very highly developed visual senses. They can see things very well, but their ability to see is not matched by their ability to be in the world, their ability to move through the world. Their motor skills lag very far behind. They can see all kinds of things in the room, but they can't get up and walk over to any of it because they're babies. Oftentimes they can't even get up and crawl or toddle or cruise over to grab any of these things. They can see a world that is beyond their grasp. Their hands, still at this age, accidentally slap them in the face. They marvel at their hands, not entirely sure that they are indeed theirs or even within their control. So when the child in front of the mirror sees this other baby, that's exactly what they see. An other baby. But here's the catch. The child in front of the mirror feels like a fragmented body. They feel like they're just a pillowcase full of chicken breasts. They're just discombobulated, uncoordinated, lacking motor skills all over the place. They can't do anything in their world. They can see it all, but they feel very weak relative to their ability to move through the world. Now they see this other baby. This other baby appears to them in the mirror as a whole baby with 2 eyes, 2 arms, a head that faces forward. This baby looks to the baby in front of the mirror like a baby who's got its stuff together. In other words, this baby looks like a better baby, one whose body is not fragmented. The image that the child sees in the mirror looks to be not a fragmented body, but a whole body, a coordinated body. And Lacan's theory is that the child in front of the mirror who feels fragmented and impotent looks into the mirror, sees this powerful, coordinated other baby, and feels threatened. Feels jealous, perhaps, and initially responds with aggressivity. So if you go to YouTube and you look up the mirror stage, what you'll oftentimes see are babies putting their mouths to the mirror image. You'll see babies hitting the mirror. You'll see babies doing all kinds of things. These look cute, they look fun, but what Lacan would point out is that these are fundamentally aggressive gestures. Initially, the baby in front of the mirror feels threatened by the image that is reflected back to them. As though this is competition. This baby is going to be better at nursing. It's going to get more food from me. It's going to take resources from me, and so on and so forth. Very animalistic, aggressive response. But here's what happens. Every time the baby leans in to attack this specular image. Specular image, speculum, mirror, a mirror image. Every time they lean in to hit that image, the other baby counters and puts their hand up. And then the child leans in and tries to bite this other baby. And guess what? The image, the reflection, the baby in the mirror does the same thing. Leans forward and puts their mouth on the mirror, as though to block the advances of the baby. They hit with the other hand, and again, the other baby blocks it. Again, the child doesn't know that that's them reflected in the mirror. They just think it's a very skilled baby, particularly skilled at blocking the aggressive moves of their opponent. And at this point, the child starts to do something different. They have a turn towards what we might call an if you can't beat 'em, join 'em philosophy. The child in front of the mirror realizes that they can't beat this baby and so begins to identify with them. I can't win against you, so I'm going to join your team. And feels an alliance with them, an identification, and eventually a kind of jubilation at the correspondence between them. This is what Lacan is going to call the alter ego. In this paragraph that we've been reading, on page 39, the fragmented body is the baby in front of the mirror. The alter ego is the specular image, the baby that appears in the mirror, that is initially a threat, then identified with, and then experienced as jubilation in relation to. The ego, this third variable, this sense of self, this sense of me, this sense of self-consciousness, the ego is the fusion of these two elements. It's that identification. My sense of self is comprised of my own feelings of insecurity, the fragmented body part, fused with all the other interactions I've had with other people, with alter egos, people with whom I've identified. The ego, your sense of self, is always comprised of these two elements. An insecure, because fragmented sense of self, fused with other senses of self that we often admire more, we think are better than us. This can be the celebrity, this can be the person who you look up to, this can be your hero. The alter ego is oftentimes referred to as well as an ideal ego. It's who you want to be when you grow up. It's who you admire, and so forth. In other words, people who seem to have way more going on in life and handling life better than you do in order to compensate for the feelings of fragmentation. You bring those two elements together, and that gives you your sense of self. That's what gives you your ego. Lacan's point is that this entire construction is imaginary. This is what he means by the imaginary. It is first and foremost a world of images. In this case, specular images, mirror images. And the diagram that you saw early on in this book, on page 14, schema L, shows you some of this. Here is the fragmented body. Here is the alter ego, or the specular image. And then here, you can see the arrow flowing from this, is the formation known as the ego, symbolized here with a lowercase m for the French moi, which means, as you know, me. So this imaginary order, comprised of a fragmented body encountering a specular image or an alter ego, and then joining it in a jubilated creation known as the ego, is a completely imaginary formation. And that's what Lacan is talking about here in the paragraph we just worked through. On page 39. Let's read it again, one more time. It is possible because the human ego is the other, and because in the beginning the subject is closer to the form of the other than to the emergence of his own tendency. Because in the beginning, your own tendency, what you want, what you're into, you didn't have any sense of that. We learn what we're into by interacting with others, which means we're closer informed to them than we are to any notion of ourselves at the start. He is originally an inchoate collection of desires. There you have the true sense of the expression fragmented body. Namely, before we meet others, we're just all over the place. We're just a mess of desires. And the initial synthesis of the ego is essentially an alter ego, because the specular image and our interaction with it becomes the foundation for the formation of our ego, of our sense of self. Now here's the key thing. The initial synthesis of the ego is essentially an alter ego. In other words, it is alienated. And this is important. There's always a fundamental distance between our egos and ourselves. It's tempting to think that you are your ego, but it's precisely the gap between the ego as a site of knowledge, self-knowledge, and somewhere else, a force inside you that is unknown, that is outside the ego, that oftentimes intrudes upon the ego, causing you to say silly stuff, to have strange dreams, this other place. That's important. There's a very real sense here that the egotistical person is someone who is living an alienated life. This is somebody who is living with and in, struggling to live with and in, a version of themselves that is not complete, because it doesn't include this other element, this other force, this place that holds all the things that we don't like to think about, like the fact that deep down, we are all still these fragmented bodies. There's more to it than this, and that's where we'll head next.